Hello and welcome to the channel. This is Sam trying to spin to win on Zwift. If you're new, I hope I'll sweat and suffer enough today to earn your subscription. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you. It is great to see you again. In today's edition of Zwift Fight Club, Club Ladder, I'll bring in an exciting battle for your viewing pleasure. In the blue corner, we have Proper Vikings. Hailing from Sweden, I present Team Swedish Zwifters Bifrost. In the red corner, we have the not-so-proper Vikings, all the way from Denmark, Danish Zwift riders Chonky Chasers. Today's fight will take place over one long round in the Muckle arena in Scotland. There are no rules in play apart from the fearsome feather. Let the best team win. Teams, take your positions. Ready, fight! Okay, on a more serious note, this should be a good match between, as you will see shortly, two relatively evenly matched teams on what I think is a very, very good club ladder course. As usual in my videos, we'll first have a look at the competition, then today's course, before we jump into the action. Finally, we'll then review the results and any lessons that we may learn from today's race. Please use the chapters in the description below to move around to the section that are of interest to you, but hopefully you will find the whole video today entertaining. Okay, let's have a look at today's competition, the Danish Zwift Racers Chonky Chasers team. Okay, there are a lot of figures on this page, and I am certainly not going to go over them all today. In fact, I am going to have a think about how I better present this analysis on YouTube going forward, but for now, this is going to have to do. As already mentioned, the Chonky Chasers made some last-minute changes, and unfortunately only had 3 riders able to make the start. However, all of those 3 riders are very strong. And I actually know one of them reasonably well from previous experience, Mr. Steen Bang Madsen. He is a very strong rider and we will be hard pressed to keep up with him today, I think. If we first compare the Zwift racing app scores, the Chonky Chasers have an average of 1760 versus ours of 1596. That is quite a big difference, and out of all the various numbers you can use to compare individuals and teams, I have found the Zwift racing app score to be one of the most accurate. So we are already in trouble here. If we then look at the watts per kilo figures, we can see that the Chonky Chasers are stronger than us on every time period I've looked at. And that is in particular true over the 5 seconds to 1 minute time frames. One example is power over 15 seconds, where they are almost 1.5 watts per kilo faster. Again, a pretty big difference. However, we do have the numerical advantage today with a 5 versus 3 race, so hopefully that will even out the competition somewhat. If we can make that advantage count, that is. Now, let's have a quick look at today's course before we start the race proper. The Muckle Yin, loved by some and hated by most.
I hate it, I hate it!
This is one of my favorite courses in Zwift, and not just because I live in Scotland. I think it has a bit of everything. Some short punchy climbs, some longer climbs requiring more sustained efforts, steep downhills, and generally lots of places where you can try different tactics based on your team's strengths and weaknesses compared to the competition. In summary, I think it's a great course for a club ladder race. The key sections are of course the 2 main climbs, the Sgurr Summit North and the Sgurr Summit South. The com for the Summit South is, I think, a bit misleading, as there is a significant climb before the actual com that you really need to count as part of the overall climb. Of course, we go up the corkscrew and the breakaway bray as well a couple of times, and the Clyde kicker towards the end of the race. Most races on the Muckle Yin are won or lost on the two bigger climbs, but unless you get a significant gap, that can be made up, especially by heavier riders on the descents. So don't think it's over just because you may have gotten a 5-second lead. For today's race, I think the teams are pretty evenly matched, so I think it will just come down to who has the better legs on the day rather than significant tactical moves. But I could of course be wrong, and we are about to find out. With that, let's get the race underway.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Zwift style. As I let the footage roll from the start of the race, I wanted to discuss our tactics. Since the opposition had changed their team just before the race and there were now only 3 riders from the Chonky Chasers, that forced us to have a bit of a rethink. Clearly, in a 5 versus 3 situation, you want to use your numerical advantage. The plan was for a couple of our riders to ride hard when we got to the first ascent of the corkscrew and then the breakaway bray that comes right after. The hope was that the other team would chase our riders and the rest of us could follow and draft as much as possible. And that would hopefully burn a few of their matches. Then, when we hit the first proper climb, the Sgurr Summit North, the rest of us would push hard and see whether we could drop anyone from the opposition. If that happened, we would then try to ensure the front group stayed away, and we would then assess the situation and make decisions on the fly, if you will, based on how many of us there were left and how we felt, and how many of the other team was still there. However, as you will see, the Chonky Chasers brought their tactical A-game today. And I have to say, we got absolutely outclassed from a tactical perspective. I just skipped forward slightly here as I wanted to point out something that made us all chuckle on Discord. If you look on the screen, you will see that one of our riders, Carl, is on his time trial bike. He had forgotten to change it from the Zwift Racing League team time trial that took place on Tuesday. I am not blaming Carl, far from it. I have made the same mistake myself, and it caused quite a bit of laughter on Discord, as we knew it would be a long race today for Carl. Not much happened for the next 5 minutes, and we are now approaching the corkscrew, where the plan was that we will start pushing the pace. However, the Chonky Chasers must have had the same idea, and as you will see shortly, they put in an absolute monster of an attack, which I have to admit caught us completely off guard. The really annoying thing is that I said to the team just a few minutes earlier that we needed to watch out for an attack here, but I was certainly not prepared myself when they did attack. As all 3 of the Chonky Chasers push over 10 watts per kilo, in other words a full-on sprint, there is panic stations on our side and we all start chasing as hard as we can. Thomas on our team was the first one to react, and he put in a valiant effort trying to close the gap. And myself and Stefan are also not too far behind. But unfortunately, we lose 2 of our other teammates here, and they would not be able to catch up for the rest of the race. I will speed up the footage so that you can see the effort we put in trying to chase them down. Thomas had clearly burned most of his matches in the initial sprint to catch up, as he starts to drift towards the back, and again is unfortunately also not able to catch up for the rest of the race. Stefan, who was very strong today, and I worked together for a number of kilometers trying to bring them back, but the gap is not coming down. The good thing, it is not growing much either, and I tell Stefan that we just need to plug away, and hopefully we can make up some ground on the Sgurr Summit North climb that is coming up. But I have to congratulate the Chonky Chasers on this attack. This was certainly the knockout blow in the race. First, they were able to drop 3 members of our team with 1 attack. Second, while me and Stefan did bring them back, as you will see in the next section, it took a massive effort to do so, and that impacted our ability to perform for the rest of the race. The one thing I learned from this was that if you decide to go as a team, you go hard, really hard. Their initial acceleration was so fast that we immediately lost the wheel. And then, even though we all went flat out, we were not able to catch them, and they got a gap which they used well. And while they clearly spent a lot of energy on this attack, I think the chasers are always on the back foot and always burn more energy, especially after losing their wheel at the start. We pick up the action at the bottom of the Sgurr Summit North. Stefan and I are about 9 seconds behind, and I'm certainly feeling the effort at this point. But I know this is probably our one chance to try to bring the Chonky Chasers back, so we both work really hard for the rest of the climb. As you will see from the footage, we start chipping away at their lead, and ultimately we catch them with around 300 meters left until the finish. But the effort had come at a cost, at least for me, as I was pretty cooked at this point, and had probably burned more matches than the other team, making up the 10-second gap. I should also point out that my heart rate monitor unfortunately decided to stop working. I tried to fiddle with it throughout the race, but nothing happened, and I would have had to get off the bike to see if I could re-establish the connection, but that would have effectively meant the end of the race for me with the front group, so I decided to keep going. While we got a bit of rest coming down from the Sgurr Summit North climb, I knew that likely would not last. If you have watched some of my previous videos, you know that I have raced against Stenvang Madsen before. As mentioned in the team review earlier, he is a very strong rider, and from experience I know that he's also very aggressive when he races. As such, it came as no surprise when he started attacking. The first attack came as we went up to the castle, footage on the screen now. The second attack came shortly thereafter as we went up the breakaway brae. And a third attack came on the next little bump. At this point I decided to let him go, as I needed to try to get a semblance of rest before the upcoming longer climb. I was again hoping that we could catch him on the climb, but tired as I was at this point, I have to admit I was starting to think about how I could finish second in the race. Steen is clearly a great rider and must have a huge VO2 max in order to keep attacking like this. We are now on the last major climb of the day, the Sgurr Summit South. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, we rejoin the action a bit before the comm starts, since that is really, at least in my opinion, where the climb actually starts. I will speed up the footage here so we can see what happens. But initially the margin to Steen keeps growing, but then all of a sudden it starts to come down. Either Steen got really tired, or more likely, he decided to wait for his teammates. Unfortunately, Stefan loses the front group on this climb. Not surprising, really, given the effort he had already put in. I think he actually hit 5 watts per kilo over 5 minutes earlier in the race, which is very impressive. So it is now me against the 3 Chonky Chasers until the finish. We are now around 2 kilometers until the finish. I have had to cover one additional attack, this one from Kim, who is clearly also a very strong rider. And as we approach the Clyde kicker, I am preparing myself for additional attacks. I am hoping I can at least get a bit of a gap on the third Chonky Chaser rider here, Tom. While clearly a strong rider, based on what I've seen so far in the race, he is perhaps not as strong on the day as Steen and Kim. I push a bit up on the Clyde kicker, as I really didn't want to do another all-out sprint at this point. And while Steen does get a gap at the top, I managed to climb kicker okay, I think. However, when we shortly thereafter get to the next little incline, they put in another dig and I am unable to answer. In hindsight, I should have pushed all out here and of course used my feather, but I was really fatigued at this point and not thinking that clearly. The one good thing was that I did get a small gap on Tom at this point. As we watch the final kilometer of the race, I'm trying my best here to close the gap to Kim and Steen in the front. I get close, but not enough to catch the draft. Very frustrating, but I was completely done by this point, and I'm just doing my best to stay ahead of Tom, who, by the way, was closing on me in the last 200 meters or so, but I crossed the line in third. As is usual for me after a race, I almost fall off the bike. I certainly gave it my best today. I just came up short against two stronger riders on the day. I clearly need to get some of what Steen is eating in order to keep attacking like he did. Tom finished just behind me, and Stefan another 20 seconds or so further back. He had actually been closing at the end. I was very impressed with his riding today. My other teammates, Brian, Carl and Thomas, finished another minute or two behind. Poor Carl on his time trial bike. And while they were a little further behind, looking at their numbers, they worked very hard as well during the race, so chapeau to them. Okay, it is now the next day, and I've had a bit of a chance to think about yesterday's race. First, congratulations to the Chonky Chasers. While you were only 3, you were much better than us and got a well-deserved win. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see Mr. Steenbang Madsen be upgraded to Category A here in the near future. Very, very good rider. Second, it was definitely a hard race. I broke my 1 minute and 8 minute power records, and I think I wasn't the only rider yesterday who got some personal bests. So there was no lack of effort, that is for sure. And third, and perhaps most important, the Chonky Chasers rode an extremely well tactical race. While there were only 3 of them, again, they outclassed us in this perspective and completely negated our numerical advantage with the way they rode their race. So again, chapeau to them. And to finish with our boxing analogy, the Chonky Chasers certainly knocked us down in the first round. While we did get off the mat, eventually they kept jabbing us throughout the race and knocked us down a few more times. However, we kept getting up and we finished all 12 rounds, but they won a clear victory on points, that is for sure. Okay, that's the end of the video today. Please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed the content, that would be much appreciated. This is Sam, trying to spin to win on Zwift, and I'll see you in the next one.